Hi guys, Ed here, and welcome to the final part 2 of the Chris Buck Strat restoration.
Yeah, hopefully you saw the video yesterday where we detailed the restoration of the pickguard and the potentiometers, and in this final instalment we're going to be putting the pickguard back together, we're going to be loading up all the pickups, assembling the guitar. We're also going to be doing some cool metal relicing work when we replace those 70s bridge saddles with the repro vintage style saddles. I've just soldered this link wire on, transferred it straight across from the original switch, and of course these screws don't look right at all. They're kind of dome headed. I don't know why they just can't provide vintage style switches with vintage style screws, but there we go. These are the originals. One thing I wanted to point out is that with vintage Strat pickguards, you get an enormous amount of dirt buildup around the inside of the cover cutouts. So if I push this one into the bridge here, it's actually really it's not as bad as some, but it's pretty jammed up. So what I've actually done is run just a sharp blade just along the inside of the middle one. And if I take that same pickup cover, this one actually slides quite freely. I mean, I actually like to be able to adjust my pickup heights and not have them wedged in the pickguard, so I think it's a sensible thing to do. The other thing is, you can see one of the original spacers here. In this era, in the 60s, Fender used surgical tubing rather than springs, and within a very short period of time it'll go almost rock solid. I mean, this has still got a little bit of give in it, but it's welded itself to the cover and it's compressed and it's holding its shape, and this is not something that is particularly useful, so I'm just going to prise it off. It's really brittle, just disintegrates. There we are, it's probably worth something on eBay. So I'm going to be using the same surgical tubing, but it's going to be fresh stuff. Meanwhile, these pickups, which are absolutely filthy, are going to have a bit of a clean-up. Probably going to use nothing more sophisticated than some soap and water. Just take off the dirt a little bit. This colour is not going anywhere, so don't worry about losing the patina. I'm going to clean up the inside of these other two, and then plan is to start wiring up the controls. Remember this? What do you pre the auctions? Well, I'm just going to stick it on the other side of the shield and hide it away for posterity. So, I'm going to start mounting up a few bits and pieces. Oh, this is cool. This is the back of the patches. See the tortoiseshell there, and the squeeze out of the celluloid nitrate and acetone mix. See which is which. Yeah, this is the one I wanted to use for the neck tone control. When putting guards back together like this, particularly old ones where things might have shrunk or one thing and another, it's always a good idea just to leave everything slightly loose and tighten everything up later on. This one might be a bit of a problem actually, but I've set a washer aside specially, and hopefully that'll be okay. I'll just get the switch in position first though. Okay. There we go. Nice and old and gnarly. Put the it's on this side. Let's flip that, try and centralize it as best we can. And just hope we've got enough thread for this nut to bite. Okay, we're on. That was a bit touch and go. Okay. Wow, that's actually starting to look like a proper pickguard. Right, so the next stage really is to get all these guys wired up, and the last thing I'll do is put on the pickups. As you can no doubt see, I've made a start on wiring up the controls. I've used the original wires to connect the two-tone controls, shifted both of them this way, and this was always, well actually this was always the neck pickup tone control, and I've mounted this Repro tone capacitor on the top in the original style. I removed the little bit of shielding that it came with, because this is this kind of cloth covered wire which is more or less the right colour, but it's non-original, and I just cut off a piece of yellow plastic insulation which I put on instead. It's a minor detail, but it's more in keeping with the original. So let's crack on with this. I'm just going to connect up the volume control. So both of these wires go in here. Okay, that is basically it. Volume control is hooked up. I've also done the little solder bridge between this lug here and the casing. This is all done, so it's time to mount the pickups. The specialist tool you need for cutting this stuff is a pair of scissors. It's not an exact science, but I would say don't cut them too long, because if you need to really compress these up, it can put a little bit of a strain on the screw hole in the bottom flat of the pickups, and if there's anything slightly marginal about that, might end up pushing the bottom of the pickup off the screw, and then you've got a repair job on the bottom flat of the pickup, and having done that, I can tell you it's not a lot of fun. Okay, 6 pieces of tubing. Got the original screws here. One of the nice things about this surgical tubing stuff is that it does a really good job of holding all the screws exactly where you want them when you're mounting the pickup. In fact, you can put all the screws in advance. Okay. Right, they're all there. So prior to doing this, cleaned up the covers. Yeah, I think that's going to be absolutely fine. So, 3 pickups are mounted on the pickguard. Now it's time to hook them up to the switch. I'll use some masking tape to wrap these guys up. Keep the cables running straight. Piece there, and a piece down here, just like Fender did it. I have trimmed my masking tape to the correct 1/2 inch width. Let's separate out the hot wires. And trim the ground wires to the correct length. What I'm going to do is just get some solder onto the pot casing. Prior to attempting to attach the wires, I'll put a little blob here as well, because this is where the ground connection to the jack is going to go. So I've exposed the wires at the end of the negative connections on these pickups, and they're just twisted wires. Whenever you've got bare twisted wires like that, you need to just run some solder in there. It's a process called tinning, which is really important for making secure, long-lasting solder joints. Okay, going to be prepared. So I've got a flat-headed screwdriver here, which is going to hold these guys in place as the solder goes off. Let's just pull out a little bit more of that wire. It's a job I only want to do once. Okay, looking good. Right, going to press them together, apply the solder, and then hold these guys down with a screwdriver as the solder goes off. There you go. Quick and easy. We've got those guys in position, and now we've got to hook up the pickups to the switch. I'm just going to establish the length of the wire I need, cut off the excess. I'll just strip the end of the wire. This is not the best way to do it, but I've misplaced my wire strippers, so that's the way it's got to be. Okay, tin the end of the wire, as I discussed. And we're on. Okay. I know that some of you found the wire relicing a little bit boring, but at least you can see the results here. I think it blends in really nicely with the original wires that do survive, which are on the switch here, and also connecting the switch to the controls. This was originally the volume control pot, but I've repurposed it, and I'm now using it as a tone control pot, and I've put a brand new volume control because Chris doesn't use tone controls at all, but he uses his volume all the time. So it's better that he has a clean, non-scratchy volume control that can be considered disposable rather than have him wear out a vintage potentiometer. So the switch has been changed, but that was entirely voluntary. The original could be put back in at any time. Chris is an in-between setting kind of guy, so I think it's perfectly legitimate that he has a 5-way switch. Nothing wrong with that. So we got the pickups rearranged. The two black bottom ones are the original to the guitar, so far as we're aware. I've put the weakest in the neck position, and I've put the slightly stronger one in the middle position. The grey bottom pickup was originally in the neck position, but I've moved it to the bridge because it has a higher DC resistance reading, so theoretically it should be more powerful. So putting that in the bridge just to see how we get on. And I should say Chris is going to be on the lookout for an original one, and I'm sure he'll find one at some point and put it in. So if anybody's got an original Strat pickup that they'd be interested in selling, do please get in touch. Yeah, but apart from that, it's about ready to go into the guitar. The other thing I've done is I've made a little note on this piece of masking tape which explains what's been done, what's original and what isn't, so anybody opening up this in the future can see. So this is the spring claw wire that I've routed through the hole in the side of the control cavity there. It goes through a hole that is drilled through to the jack socket cavity, and this is going to get soldered directly onto the jack in the vintage Fender style. A lot of people solder them directly to the volume control potentiometer, but it's not how it was done in the 60s, and for ease of maintenance I prefer to do it the vintage way, because if you need to pop the pickguard out, it's 2 wires to disconnect rather than 3. So the key thing is, has this solder joint worked, and have I got continuity between the claw, this wire, and the bridge? Only one way to find out. I've got a continuity setting on my meter, which makes a beep if all is good. Touch the strings, and we're good. Okay, so the jack is cleaned up. The wires have been soldered onto the jack, and I can fix it back down. These screws look very like the pickguard screws, but they're slightly larger on these original ones. It's time to look at the saddles. The guitar, when Chris bought it, was fitted with some replacement saddles from the 1970s. So these are repros. Why repros? Well, most of the vintage Strat saddles that have survived since the 60s are kind of rusted up, and they cost an absolute fortune. And I don't think, beyond the originality aspect, that they're worth getting, because for a player's great guitar like Chris's, we want it to be as playable as possible. And when these grub screw holes have rusted out and the intonation holes have rusted out, you can't necessarily set them up with the accuracy that Chris needs. So I suggested we go for a set of replica saddles, and I'm going to relic them up. But a little note of caution when you're relicing metal parts is I want to make these look rusty and I want to make them look old, but the threaded sections where the grub screws go for height adjustment and intonation adjustment screw at the back, I don't want that to get rusty at all. So I'm taking these apart and I'm going to put some grease in these threads before I submerge them in salty water and age them electronically, which I'll show you in a short while. Okay, here's how you do it. This is salt water, a lot of salt, warm water to help you get it to dissolve. So I'm using a 12-volt transformer and I'm just putting a bit of grease on the end of one of these intonation screws. That goes in like that, and I'm just going to wrap the negative side from the transformer around the end of the screw. Okay, here's where the magic happens. Just drop this in the water and everything bubbles up really nicely. I'm not actually touching the screw that I've got connected to the positive side of the transformer. Okay, it's been in there a few seconds. Okay, hopefully you can see that. And for comparison, there's a shiny one. Let's give you a better view of that. Okay, spot the difference. Need to get fairly close to this screw that I've dropped in, connected to the positive. But don't let them touch. Okay, so if I put this off to one side, I have 6 freshly aged saddles. Don't look too bad. Just to knock the shininess off, really. And it also think in terms of when you're relicing, if you're interested in relicing, it's almost like kick-starting the process. Let's get these on the guitar and see if they actually sound better than the Mazak saddles. Worst case scenario, put these on and take them straight back off again, because it sounds pretty good as it is, but it'll look better with these.
So quite a momentous moment then, Hugh. It's the end of the process.
Yeah, it's been a long process, but you know, part of that due just to the whole lockdown thing, and also, but it's been a great project. You know, it dates back to before Christmas, and you know, one of the things I remember when I first saw this guitar with Chris is I said to him, in all honesty, I'm not getting a good vibe off this guitar, Chris. You know, I knew it needed a lot of work, and you know, I'm not daunted by that, but I just didn't get a good vibe off it at all. And boy, was I wrong.
I remember it was in a right state, wasn't it? It was dirty, there was strings missing, big holes cut out of it, front and back, you know, all sorts of crazy mods.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as straightforward as picking it up and strumming this mystical chord and going, yes, this is going to be amazing when we put some fresh strings on it. You know, it's
no,
a bit more than that.
If you tried strumming that guitar, you'd probably end up in hospital having a tetanus jab.
Yes.
It was, yeah, I just didn't get a good vibe off it at all. And then I really kind of started falling for it a little bit when I started working on it. And yes, it's a great process, and it was different to a lot of the restoration work that I do, because, well, it's for a pro player, and also someone who's not kind of enthralled to the whole vintage thing.
Definitely.
I mean, he understands it and he's into it, but Chris is happy playing modern guitars and delighted to play vintage guitars as well. So instead of just like trying to make it look like, you know, a vintage guitar, nothing had ever happened to it, and going down the refinish route and the relic finish, it was, the focus of this one was much more on turning it into a playing instrument for Chris, to gig with, no issues vintage guitar basically.
Does that affect sort of decision making, or can you point to some real key differences perhaps you would have done differently if it was a collector's guitar rather than a guitar which is hopefully going to be out there playing gigs for the next 20, 30 years with Chris?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we actually took a decision to retire one of the key components under the pickguard because it still had the original three-way switch. Great, but, you know, Chris is an in-between, you know, position kind of guy.
He's an in-betweener.
Yes, yeah, and he needs a five-way switch, so that was changed. We put a brand new volume control in there. Chris rides the volume control all the time, and it's going to wear out. So rather than wear out, you know, wear out a vintage potentiometer, we'll just chuck a regular 250K in there, and in a year's time, if it needs replacing, who cares? The other thing was the big decision about whether to do a refin or not.
Exactly. Yeah, I know he got a bit of stick on his page from the comments. Different people saying, you know, you should refinish it this colour, change it to this colour, do this, do that. I think the right decision's been made to keep it as it is. It's got a cool character and vibe, again, because it's going out on tour. If it was a wall hanger, perhaps it would have been a different decision.
Again, I think it was like a growing thing, just as I kind of like really started getting into this guitar and getting to like it the more I worked on it. I think for Chris, it was like the more we lived with the colour, the more he kind of thought, actually, I really like the look of this. And plus, you know, it's not a nitrocellulose finish, but it's cracked up, it's got patina, it just looks really, really cool. And, you know, I could have done a relic refinish on it and plugged all the holes and done all the woodwork and all that kind of stuff. But then, for what reason, to be honest? It would have just been another vintage Fiesta Red Strat, whereas it's something quite unique as it is, and I think that's eventually why we went down that route.
I think it's a sensible decision, and he's got plenty of other Strats of different colours when the mood takes him. So,
Exactly. I think the big surprise was the tuners.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's just like, of course, you need to play this live. Of course, we're going to need some repro tuners.
And because often on vintage guitars, tuners are the real pain in the ass, basically, aren't they? You know.
Yeah, they can be. And as soon as I restored these, because I thought I'll restore them, and it was just store them away and, you know, one thing and another. And I put them on, and it was just like, this guitar will not go out of tune. It's just like, I don't know what's going on with it, but it just, you know, it just will not go out of tune. I mean, one thing we did change, I mean, initially when I put it back together, I had the original nut in there. I'd shimmed the bottom of it, and it looked great, and it was fine for me playing it. But Chris plays so hard. I mean, he really, really digs in. And we were getting like weird kind of vibrations behind the nuts, and you know, it became apparent that it wasn't going to be up to the job for him.
Yeah.
And so I just made him a new nuts, and everything seems to be fine now. So that's another thing that we changed. And I relicked up a knob to replace the missing knob, and I know Chris has been pricing out vintage parts and thinking,
Yeah.
do I really want to spend, you know, £400 on a piece of plastic?
I think Chris has done very well with it, and hope to see and hear lots more of that guitar in the future.
Well, I'm just really excited to turn up to the first gig possible and actually see that in action live. And I know Chris is like absolutely itching to get out there and use it as well. In his video, which you should check out, it's Buck and Evans Friday Fretworks. He actually does one section where he just has to crank it up, and he's out in the garage,
Yeah, I saw.
you know, playing really, really loud.
Yeah.
And that's a treat to behold.
Okay, so we've got a bunch more interesting projects coming up on Tone Twins. So please do subscribe if you haven't done already. It's been a great pleasure to be involved with Chris in this project, so thanks again, Chris. and we'll have some more guests coming up soon, bunch more projects, and hopefully see all you guys soon. So thanks for watching.
Dabo.
Hwyl fawr.
This is mine. This is surreal. It's like I'm borrowing your guitar or something.
No, it's always yours.